Hello and welcome back. My name is Dr. Christopher Gennari. This is the Great Big History Podcast. In this episode, we do Japan from 1500 to around 1800. And what we see is one of the trademarks of Japanese history, that connection between medieval Japan and medieval Europe, that it's not a strong state. From 1180 to 1500, the imperial government lost control of land outside of Kyoto. Increasingly, the imperial government, the emperor, becomes religiously important but not politically important. And with that, Japan breaks up into smaller kingdoms. Lords become independent. You get the rise of warlords, you get the rise of nobles, you get the rise of great families, and it looks like the feudalism of medieval Europe. And this is one of those old themes. When I grew up, this was Japan and Europe were like the same. And that Japan is different than Korea, and it's different than China. And there was this connection that the Japanese are like the most European of Asiatic peoples. And there's definitely a racism in that, and there's definitely a knowing where the story is going to go. And so knowing that Japan becomes an industrialized country, that the European historians know this, and so when they write about medieval Japan, they write about it as a state that will become powerful. And so they looked at their own histories and looked at England and looked at Europe and said, oh, it's just like us. And yet not, because while I guess Japan could have formed into lots of different countries, it doesn't. The major islands remain under at least a nominal idea of the imperial line. And what you get is civil wars. As cousins upon cousins, just like the Mongols had their grandsons, the same thing happens. You get the branches of the imperial line. Look at the major line and say either one, it's too weak and I can do better, so I'm going to be emperor, and so you get a civil war. Or they say, I'm too far away, I'm too rich, I'm going to do my own thing, and I'm not going to challenge the emperor, my cuz, but I'm not exactly going to listen to him either. And so they become independent. And when the powerful do that, the more families follow. The minor lords do the same. They say, well, I'm pretty far away from the emperor, and I'm pretty far away from these guys who are telling the emperor to, shove off. So why don't I do it? What's the worst that can happen? And in this, you have that parade. You have the, well, if they could do it, I'll do it too. The Mongol invasions led to the breakup of Japan. Rather than uniting Japan, like the Viking invasions in France, didn't lead to the unity of Europe or France. It actually broke it up. It led to the feudalism. The central government couldn't protect the locales. And so local warlords created their own armies. And once they had their own armies, they had independence. Basically, the emperor could tell them to do something, and the warlord would say, come down here and make me. Now, strong emperors might try. But in this period, we increasingly have weak, poor emperors who say, all right, just do what you want. Figuring that as long as they don't lose in battle, which is the ultimate proof of your power, you could still hold things together. But once you lose in battle, all bets are off. The knives come out. Everybody wants to be the new emperor. No one's going to listen to you anymore. And so it's kind of like weak, but existing, as opposed to losing and proving everyone you shouldn't exist. Japan remains poor compared to China especially, and even Korea at times. Japan has this poverty. It doesn't have many resources. It doesn't have a lot of land for agriculture. When in an era where agriculture equals wealth. And so what you get is piracy and mercenaries. The Japanese are famous pirates. They get a name, the Woku. These are Japanese Vikings. They raid, they occupy coasts. They don't just like attack ships like Caribbean, like the Pirates of the Caribbean. No. These are like Vikings. They like land on the shore and like take over towns for a while. They get involved in local politics as soldiers. They're mercenaries. They hire themselves out, either the local warlords, or they hire themselves out to the emperor, or they hire themselves out sometimes to Chinese or Korean or Mongolian armies. They're perfectly willing. This poverty is forcing them out. And this is going to be the samurai. The samurai, for all their honor and their bravado and the stories being told about them, they're mercenaries. They are willing to fight for he who pays them. So that's the Seven Samurai, right? The story of the Seven Samurai, also known as A Bug's Life, also known as the Magnificent Seven, are seven itinerant samurai. They're professional warriors who are hired by a local town to protect them from bandits. They're not doing it for free. Certainly not in the beginning. For Japan, trade equaled money, which equaled independence. And so lots of lords get involved in trade. Japan has lots of mountains, so it has some mineral trade. It's bringing in minerals, especially iron for swords. They're selling low-end minerals to China and Korea for luxury items, for manufactured goods. So early on in this period, from 1180 to 1800, Japan is at the low end of the economic ladder. They're selling bulk goods, raw materials, for exotic, sparse, expensive luxury items. Which brings us to the samurai, the most famous part of this period, the one that many of you are like, yeah, this is definitely the part I like, the bushi. They will become important. This is the high tide of them, the knights, of the Japanese knights. They combined war with high culture, and that gave them legitimacy. What separated a samurai from a bandit? This combination of war, style, ceremony, and culture. It's violence plus honor plus sophistication. And the idea that China didn't have this, barbarians didn't have it, bandits don't have it. Barbarians are the Mongols, for example. That this idea of combining the body, the spirit, the sword, and the arm with the mind is the sexy part. It's what is in Kill Bill. It's in the samurai movies. It's in the Seven Samurai. It's in all of the comic books. It's in, if you play a D&D character, a samurai or a monk, that's these warrior monks. That's what we're talking about. This combination of body, soul, mind, spirit, violence, but also culture. It is this combination of war and culture, of mind, spirit, and body, that in the Christian world is called chivalry. Knights have chivalry. Local bandits don't have chivalry. They're murderers. And it gives them legitimacy. And legitimacy is defined as the ability to get other people to accept your right to tell them what to do. It is the ability to get other people to accept your right to tell them what to do. And so the samurai, in combining these things, gives them legitimacy. It gives them their power. It is the justification for why they exist. So because of this, sword making and the things connected to the bushi, connected to the samurai, become a high art, highly sophisticated, highly stylized, highly ceremonial, and it becomes a major export to Korea, to China, more for art than for war. Chinese armies are not going to use the katana blade But it is that nature, that this combination of violence and art, that is becoming the hallmark of medieval Japanese society. Just like in natural history museums today, you have armor. You have, medieval armor and swords and pikes. In a museum, the same was true for Japanese weapons. Japan became an armed society, which separated the rich from the poor. To use a sword, you have to have training, which means you have to have the money to hire a master to teach you how to use a sword, or to go to a school to use a sword. You also have to buy the sword. And so this separates the rich from the poor. The rich are armed and could commit violence when they wanted. The poor could not. Again, a similarity to medieval Europe. A separation of the rich from the poor. The rich have this education. The rich have the culture. The rich have the weapons. And so they think of themselves as better, as different than one, bandits, and two, peasants. You see this in Game of Thrones. You see this all over Game of Thrones, right? The Hound may not want to be called a knight, but he always looks down at both the brigands, at the bandits, and at peasants. The peasants suffer, so what? The brigands have no skill. They have no honor. They don't know how to fight. They don't really know how to fight. They just know how to kill peasants. This brings us to Zen Buddhism. Zen Buddhism is going to explode in popularity. It spread along the trade routes by monks. But as it came out of India into China, it became Chinese, became less Indian. And as it reaches Japan, it becomes less Indian. It becomes almost unrecognizable to Indian Buddhism. It becomes less textual as it travels. So the monks that are bringing it, the merchants that are bringing it, it's transforming to what is a farther away, poorer, and less literate society than Indus and Ganges River, India, or the Yangtze Yellow Mesopotamia, the land between the Yellow and the Yangtze of China. As it's traveling, it's becoming less dependent on the word, on the books. So Buddhism is about finding personal happiness through the limitation of suffering. That's what it's about. It is understanding the nature of cause and effect, of what causes suffering, and how do you limit suffering. You can never eliminate it. You will always have pain in one's life. Life is pain. But the idea is that you can limit it because you can understand what causes it. You could find your own path through rightness. This is what's called the Eightfold Path. You can find your own path through life. That everybody has a path. It's very individual. That path is laid out for you. And that you have, through meditation and contemplation, the ability to follow it. And in fact, one of the things that causes pain is not following that. You were meant to be something. You were meant to do something. You have a path to follow. Ultimately, everyone can find enlightenment, peace, and happiness. There's still suffering, but you can limit it and you can find happiness. That is the number one value of Buddhism. And so this is Buddhism is very individualistic, which is going to work in medieval Japan. Remember, Confucianism is about hierarchy, about what one does for the group. Confucianism is about your role in a larger society, in a larger group, whether it's the family, whether it's the town, whether it's the city, the province, the empire. Buddhism is about your own personal fulfillment, your own personal enlightenment. It comes from China, which means it's sophisticated. Everything that comes out of China is older, it's bigger, it's richer. It comes out of China, it already drips of sophistication. It emphasizes, the Chinese version emphasizes meditation, control of the body and the thought. Now, this comes from Buddha in India. This is the Buddha finds enlightenment underneath the tree. You know, one can get in touch with the world. And this is going to appeal to the Bushi and the samurai. This is going to appeal to them because it's about control of body and thought. Breathing becomes very important. Slowing your breath, counting your breaths. Being one with yourself is going to appeal to the samurai because their entire lifestyle is about control. Control of violence, control of their body, perfecting their body so that they're strong enough, they're swift enough, they're dexterous enough to do what their body needs them to do. They are Ferraris. They are professional athletes. And so here is a philosophy that emphasizes your ability to control those things. Third, it doesn't need infrastructure like Christianity does. There's not a lot of churches. You don't need a lot of priests. You can do this on your own. It appeals to poor people because it doesn't require all of these buildings, all of this knowledge, all of these books. Temples and monks equal education. Where they'll be built, they become vortexes for knowledge and self-improvement. They're not necessary in Zen Buddhism. But where they do exist, they become the place for upward mobility of peasants because there's education here. Buddhism is still tied to books. It's still tied to commentary. It's still tied to knowledge. It's tied to literacy. Literacy is always defines education in the ancient medieval world. If you're literate, you're educated. Buddhism gave a message of equality in a hierarchical society. It said you are important even if you are someone's vassal, underneath someone else's vassal, underneath someone else's vassal. It also emphasized mindfulness. So these two things, equality and mindfulness, emphasize you, the person, you're the individual, in a world that you are usually someone is your boss. And yet here's a philosophy to telling you you're important. Know thyself. It is defined, it allows you to find quiet in this busy life. And so it appeals to Westerners in the late 20th century. Everybody I knew when I went to college got Dr. Seuss's Ode to Places You'll Go and Benjamin Hoff's The Tao of Pooh. And how Winnie the Pooh was a Buddhist philosopher in his lifestyle. A very popular book from the 70s, Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. It's not really about Zen. It's not about motorcycle maintenance, but it's this quiet in the busy life. And it appeals to Americans, to Westerners in the 70s. The modern psychology and not psychoanalysis, which is tied to Freud, but modern self-help is tied to Buddhism, to mindfulness. You go through therapy, and likely your psychologist will be trained in some form of mindfulness. They will teach you mindfulness. This is an age of literature, and it's an age of war stories. Of course it's an age of war stories. It's an age of war. It's an age of fighting, and the people who are doing the fighting are literate people who need to justify their position. And so you get the Tale of the Hogan, the excellent and very famous Tale of the Henki, which I know I spell Heki. Civil War, bandits, the rising up, the fighting against long odds. It emphasizes Buddhism, the fleeting nature of fortune. What is good once, one day it falls away the next. Remember, life is suffering. There's always bad things around the corner. And emphasizes the Buddhist idea of karma, that actions have consequences. That if you do something good will happen back to you. If you do something bad, sooner or later, something bad is going to happen to you. It combined nature magic and spirits, so this is the shaman, the old religions, with the warrior monks. And it has romance tempered by duty. You want to be together. You should be together. You desire to be together. You would be great together, but duty is keeping you apart. The old, which is more important, your head or your heart? Your desire or your obligations? And so you have these war stories that have war in them. And the war is the main theme, but there's all these other themes going on underneath there. The Lady Nijo court stories. These are the wise slave, the Voltaire type plays. They're the insider. We see this a lot in Europe in the courts, and you see this. These are gossip stories. This is the National Enquirer and Star Magazine. The most people will never see the emperor. They'll never see court. They'll never see those people. All they know is they're famous people who have a lot of money and they dress really well. And they must be sophisticated. And so you want to know what those lives are like. And so writers pop up to sell them. We see this a lot. Woodcut. And for the illiterate, you get the woodcuts that will show you this scene. And so what Lady Nijo is doing is the insider lives of the rich and the famous. And we had an entire TV show. Donald Trump was on it. The life of the rich and the famous, right? It's rise and it's falls, it's sex and drugs, it's honor and dishonor, it's loyalty and infidelity. It is all of those things going on, but with famous people. It emphasizes material wealth. What clothes are they wearing? What silks are they buying? What are their books wrapped in? There's the idea of the court versus the samurai. The court is sophisticated. The samurai are the tough bad boys. Sophistication versus barbarism all in the same place. Yeah, the samurai might talk about how sophisticated they are and how educated they are, but compared to the court, the emperor and the emperor's homeboys, and those are all the samurai are basically thugs to them. So there's this sophistication versus the barbarism. The samurai are definitely the bad boys, and the court is the wishy-washy rich boys who, they talk tough, but they have nothing to back it up. And hypocrisy. Hypocrisy is huge. The monks are not Buddhist. The samurai are not honorable. Husbands and wives are not loyal. The nobles are not loyal to the emperor. The emperor is selling out nobles. Everyone's selling out their sons, their daughters. They're hooking them up. They're breaking up their marriages. They're doing all kinds of stuff. It's hypocrisy. Why? Why hypocrisy? Because the people who are reading these stories, the people who are listening to these stories, the poor people, they think of their lives as, I do what's right. Now, is that true? Probably not. But do they recognize it? No. And this is true now. You see this with your friends. You see this with your family. You see this with your coworkers. Everybody thinks they live a good life. Very few people are like, my life, I am the bad part of my life. Everyone thinks they're doing what's right. So they're honorable. They're truth. But here are these other people who have more money, who are richer, who are more sophisticated, they're better educated. Why do Americans without college degrees love stories about how rich people with college degrees are idiots? It's in our television shows. It's in our movies. It is rich people who have college degrees are morons a lot of the time. Why? Because otherwise, they have so many advantages that if they're actually smart, then what's the point? Then I am a loser. And the stories don't never, ever want the reader to feel like a loser. They want the reader or hearer of the story to feel superior. And so Poor people, the one thing they've got, they have no money, they have no education, they have no family, they have no connections. But they have their honor. They have their sense of justice, and hypocrisy gets right to it. Oh, they might have money, but they're liars, and they're cheats, and they're scoundrels. And they love, it's like fat off a steak. It's the best part. Yeah, there's the war and the sex and the drugs, but they love the part that the audience wants to hear is the hypocrisy. The lying liars who act just. In this world of sophistication and control and the body, we get the tea ceremony. The simplicity, the minimalism. But highly, highly structured. It is very Zen. It is in the silence. It is in the craftsmanship. It is in the doing a simple thing very well. It is also about bringing people together. It's not, you don't do the tea ceremony alone. You do it with others. It's also a place for women. Women cannot be samurai. But they can participate in the tea ceremony. It is one of the 3 refinements. Flower decoration, incense are the others. It is highly stylized. There is a procedure that is highly followed. It is to bring you to close to nature. It is about simple objects, not highly ornate ones that follow the trade routes. It followed the Buddhist routes. Like, remember, tea is coming out of India. It's going to come following the Buddhist monks into China and then into Japan, but it is a foreign object. The tea ceremony is a place where men and women can meet in public. But notice, it's going to have all these rules on who can talk to who, when you could talk, what you can ask. And so it's a very regulated place, kind of like 17th century dancing. If you ever watch the Jane Austen movies, when people dance, there's a very structural way of the dancing that doesn't let men and women, it lets them together, but not for too long and not for too intimate a moment, and not too alone. The whole point of this was to show one's sophistication, one's control of one's body and environment, one's mindfulness. And it was public. All this was done in public. To spill the tea and say, shit, is to lose face in that, is to be like, you spill the tea and you say nothing. You just do it again, make more tea. And so this is all done in public. It is a way of showing your awesomeness in a public forum. Women in Japan are a problem. And it's not their fault that they're a problem. It's because there are different philosophies that are interacting in Japan at the same time. There's Chinese Confucianism. It is the major political philosophy. It is all over the place. Emperors love it because it's about hierarchy and piety. And it is about one's submission to other groups. For a woman, it was about submission to father, family, husband, and then the husband's family. So it's about finding your place, but your place is never on top in Confucianism. You always have obligations to others. At the same time, there's growing Buddhism. We just talked about the Zen, and we talked about the tea ceremony, which is about equality, mindfulness, finding your own path. That path is not subservient. It is equal. Women can be as enlightened as men. You can achieve your own success. And so here are 2 conflicting things. How does your Buddhist belief fall into your Confucian lifestyle, the Confucian society? If Buddhism is personal and Confucianism is the wider political world, how do you deal with that? And that's a problem, because the 2 are always going to be in conflict. You can't be in a hierarchy and be fulfilled individually. It doesn't work. There can't be a hierarchy and equality. And so there's always going to be this conflict. Much of this doesn't matter because it's poverty. For poor people, they don't have the luxury of debating Confucianism versus Buddhism and their role in the larger world. They have hard labor on farms. And women's lives are dictated by what they have to do at that time. There's also the hard labor of their bodies, whether it's their monthly menses cycle or childbirth. Poor women are always subject to the powers above them, of poverty, of their body, of the society. In court, rich women have a role in sexual politics. Getting married, who they marry, who their daughters marry, who their sons marry, who they have affairs with. In court, the closer you are to the emperor, the more important you are. Which means the closer the person you're sleeping with is to the emperor, the more important you are. And so there's a whole secondary in the court. If women on the farms are about monogamy and loyalty, because the society is profoundly Confucian, at the court, politics is a crazy house. Who you marry affects greatly what your future role will be and who you have sex with or don't have sex with can affect your politics. The wealthier women had more sophistication, more education, more zen. And we see this in their calligraphy, their dress, their behavior, the fact that if you take a look at our imagery of our tea ceremony, these are not poor women. These are not women who are raising chickens in some rural town outside of, in one of the poor islands. These are wealthier women. Their dress, their silks, their behavior and control, their knowledge, their education. Wealthier women lived a better, more sophisticated, educated life. And a more individual one, a more Zen, a more Buddhist one. War, the constant part of war in feudal Japan, plus the Bushi codes, the samurai codes, meant women were alone a lot. Their husbands were away at war. They were fighting for their lords. So women became independent and capable. They had to be. The men were away. Women lived a very homosocial life where they lived with other women because a lot of the time the men weren't around. Marriage, coming out of China and coming out of Korea, there are a lot of romantic tales. Old romance. The tale of the Henki has it in it. The literature of Japan is full of romance, but very little of it translated to reality. Marriage was functional. It was conditional. Women left. Well, the men were gone at war, so women left. Divorce existed. It was easier for a man to divorce a woman, but a woman could divorce a man, and they left. They might move back in with their fathers, their father's family. They might find a new man. This is in court politics. You had an affair. You might move on, move up. Women are participants in this society. They are important parts of this society, but they are not fully realized as citizens. They are not equal in this society. They are important. They have important roles. Those roles are very feminine. But there is a clear ceiling to how important, how integrated, how independent they can be. And so where they find their place is in the places between those roles. In court, when their husbands are away, either as a merchant or at war, those are the moments. Those are the places where women could create these independent roles, which is enforced by Buddhism, by Zen. They're allowed to do it. They can do it. They have the philosophical room to do it. Unlike a lot of China or Korea, where Confucianism is, especially with the Ming into the Qing, much heavier, much more oppressive Confucianism than Buddhism. But in Japan, there's this room intellectually, and there's, in a lot of women's lives, the space because the men aren't around. So they have the ability to do it, but they had to do it individually on their own. They had to carve out their own space. And there's an argument that that's still happening, that the society is still this way. There's very, that women are still finding it, Japanese women are still in the 21st century having not the social acceptance, but having to carve out their own individual independence separate from the society at large. So I hope that's Japan. So I hope all is well. I'll see you soon. We'll have a new episode soon. Take care.